So I'll just preface this by saying I'm going to do the whole talk, but my co-author Robert Apel is in the back, so you'll forgive me if I misconstrue his thoughts. I also, this was a tricky chapter for us to write, and I think for me in particular. So by way of background, I have a PhD in sociology, but I've only worked in crim departments, and I also did a pre-doc training in developmental psych. So I was told to be a criminologist today, so that's the hat I'm going to wear. Our chapter does a couple of things that are similar to what Kristen talked about. We spend some time talking about criminological theories, and I'm not actually going to talk about those today. I'm going to talk about the empirical side of things. But I took this contribution as thinking about the things that make me uncomfortable when I'm teaching Introduction to Criminal Justice. And I'm trying to reconcile the facts about the criminal justice system with the research that I've done on parental incarceration and inequality. And so I'd like to share those facts with you today. Just by way of background too, so criminological theory and perspectives are by definition interdisciplinary. So we're drawing from sociology, we're drawing from psychology, from economics. It isn't a field that is a discipline like the others that you'll hear about today. Criminology is also outcome driven, right? So we're interested in crime and predicting crime, and in some ways we've been less good at developing theories of punishment that make sense. Those have often come from other places in thinking about the effects of punishment on children in particular. In addition, in our contribution, we write about theories of crime, but most of those theories in criminology are focused on parental crime, not punishment. And so what is the effect of having parents who are involved in crime on children? And interestingly, criminology theories are not uniform in thinking that's harmful. Most criminology theories suggest that parents hide their crime from children and don't endorse it for their children. And one, I think, interesting piece of this that someone should write a dissertation on is what is the difference in terms of effects on children of unobservable parent crime, so parents hiding crime from kids, and observable punishment. And can we think through whether those effects are different or interesting, and what could that tell us about how to move forward? What I do want to talk about today, though, is what can criminology teach us? What social facts might we want to incorporate into our work on parental incarceration? And so I'm going to talk about criminal justice processing, because I think that's one thing criminology brings to the table. Selection through the system, which Kristen mentioned, compositions of prisons and jails, because I think those are important. So this is CJ 101, right? This is the criminal justice system, and in my teaching we begin thinking about crime and what crime looks like, and then talking about the point of arrest. And then people proceed through the system. They are arrested, they may not be charged, so people fall away. People who are charged may plea or go to trial. They're then sentenced to some sort of intervention, prisons, jails, probation. And then we here in this room start estimating prison effects, and that's what I've done in my research. I do, though, think it's really important to move, and this is where I'll end, is that we need to move beyond these sort of never incarcerated, ever incarcerated comparisons, because in fact, there is a very large amount of heterogeneity within the criminal justice system and how people are processed through it. And to sort of start at the end there is quite problematic in my view. Academics will know this cartoon maybe, that oftentimes, especially if you're thinking about the criminal justice system, we tend to focus on one piece of it, right? So we have people who are focused on policing, for example, who are almost never in conversation with people who are focused on incarceration. We're very much siloed in criminology, and I think that siloing is mirrored in the parental incarceration literature, that we're siloed in our disciplines and not having those across-discipline conversations. I would point out, for example, in criminal justice research, my sizing has gone off here, I apologize. But so we know a lot about the predictors of arrest, and so what brings people to the attention of police. We know almost nothing about what happens after that. So how do we make charging decisions? How do plea bargains work? And when I think about inequality, that where the miracle occurs is really where inequality happens. That there is so much inequity built into that stage of the system that really explains what comes later when we're thinking about incarceration. There's a lot of research on sentencing and what drives sentencing, but then I think we have another misstep, and so I'd highlight Kristen Turney's work on jails. Lots of us, I'm now doing work on the conditions of confinement. We treat incarceration as if it's some sort of uniform intervention, which is insane, right? So if you've spent any time in one prison, you've spent time in one prison. And in fact, they are massively different in terms of the experience. And so the idea that we're sort of, as I've done in my research, estimating some sort of prison effect is masking all of this. And I think I'm very much in agreement with your comments about moving forward and pushing heterogeneity. And I would push that along criminal justice processing lines as well. So here's the other CJ 101. This is the funnel model of the criminal justice system. Anyone who has ever taken a CJ course has seen this. It's in every criminal justice textbook. And this is where I think we should be uncomfortable with the effects that we've produced. This is a common diagram in CJ text because we want our students to understand how the criminal justice system works and how many selection processes are happening at each stage. So out of 1,000 crimes committed, only 500 crimes get reported. So the idea of this kind of never-ever comparison, even at that stage, doesn't make any sense. And things trickle down to roughly 18 incarceration sentences that results from those 1,000 crimes. And I think in this field of parental incarceration, we have to start being honest about what that process looks like and really paying attention to what kicks people out. Why do some people get charged? Why do some people get dismissed? And what do the population of children that are connected to those people look like? And I think that would move forward, move research forward considerably. The other kind of social fact that makes me uncomfortable in terms of my own research when I'm teaching is the difference between prison incarceration and jail incarceration. So we often have a graph like this, so 1.5 million people in jail on a daily average in any given year, about 750,000, in jail, 1.5 million in prison. Most of our data is based on people who are in prison. Most of the parental incarceration effects are based on this population. But if we start really thinking about how many people are cycling through jails on a daily basis, it looks more like this. Okay, so that's a massive population of people who are spending time in jails, who have not been convicted of anything, who are awaiting sentencing, awaiting trial, have been sentenced for very short terms. And we know that even short spells in jails are highly consequential for families and for children. And so I worry that we're so focused on this little bar on the left that we're missing a huge amount of variation and important populations. The other one that really makes me uncomfortable and that I have difficulty reconciling, and Anna mentioned it, this issue of violence versus nonviolent drug offenders. When I look at conversations that I'm involved in about criminal justice reform, it's all nonviolent drug offenders. And the statistics Anna put up suggest that reducing the incarceration of nonviolent drug offenders would be quite helpful for children. I'm in full agreement on that. The problem, though, is that if you look at people's conviction histories, and not just their current conviction offense, there is a lot of violence embedded within the population of people who are nonviolent drug offenders on any given day, right? So this is a population that has a history of all sorts of problems, and what criminologists know is that people tend not to specialize in certain forms of crime. And so the idea that we would only focus on the sort of low-hanging fruit, I feel like dodges a really important problem, which is that most people are serving time in prison for violent crimes. And in addition, we spend a lot of time talking about reform at the federal level. But in fact, the action is at the state level, right? So the federal criminal justice system, the federal prison system is about 13% of all people who are in prison. The state system houses about 87% of the prison population. And so drugs make a lot of sense if you're talking about the federal system. It's drugs and guns, right? But in the state system, it's very much a population of people who've been convicted of violent crimes. And as far as I can tell, that is not part of the discussion. That group gets sort of siloed away from an idea of reform, and so that concerns me. And again, is also a sort of social fact that makes me uncomfortable when I think about my research and what I know and what I need to know. Lastly, I want to think a little bit about the implications of this, and as I said in our contribution, we talk more about theory, but I think what all of that leads up to is that we really have to move beyond never ever incarcerated comparisons and really think about take seriously parental crime, take seriously parental arrest versus incarceration, and to get a sense of what sorts of reforms would be most useful for reducing incarceration overall, but especially improving well-being outcomes for children. And I think never ever comparisons are more limited than we have acknowledged, and I include myself in that population. Criminology, I think, also is useful in distinguishing between parental criminality and parental punishment and trying to make sense of how they align and how they don't. It also helps us think about selection in a different way, and instead of sort of bracketing it as selection bias, thinking about the kinds of effects that parents can have on children and the kinds of things we might account for. So theories of parental crime and how that then gets transmitted to children, I think, would also be a useful addition to the conversation. The other part that I'm really struggling with and that I'd love to have a conversation about is I think it's really difficult to tackle who's in prison and why and how this influences families. And here I would say is the biggest weakness among criminological perspectives. It can be simultaneously true that the criminal justice system is an engine of driving inequality. The criminal justice system can be stunningly inequitable and racist, and any word you want to apply. It is also the case that most people who are in prison did something to get there. And I think that criminology has been more focused on trying to figure out why certain behaviors make you come into contact with the criminal justice system, and less good at having a theory of inequality or a theory of race or a theory of class. And I think if I put my sociology hat on, I think sociology has been really good at thinking about the criminal justice system in terms of race and class, and not so great at thinking about the behaviors of people that cause them to come to the attention of police, for example, which again is inequitable, but also behavioral. And so for me, the thing that I struggle with the most is reconciling those two truths. And what I think for parental incarceration, though, is that this offers some sort of an opportunity. I think about the conversation going on with regard to policing in our country. And one of the problems with inequitable policing is that it reduces people's thoughts about the legitimacy of the entire system. I think parental incarceration has the potential to be doing that too. And so if children are watching their parents be treated unfairly, treated in a way that doesn't make sense, if they're surrounded by incarceration experiences, I also think that has the potential to reduce legitimacy in the entire system. So for me, what I would love is more conversation and less siloing, both across disciplines, but also within criminology. It just is rarely the case that in a group like this, there's somebody sitting there who studies courts, right? Does anyone study courts in this policing? I mean, that's another silo I think that could be broken down. And to the degree that criminology can be part of that conversation, that to me would be helpful. Thanks. So I've listed some contact information here. If there's questions or resources that you'd want for the statistics I gave, I'd love to hear your comments. Thanks.